welcome to CentreCourt MBA Festival New York, both to the audience that's joining us here at the Times Center today, and of course, I think in London a few weeks ago, we had 38,000 of you following on the live stream. So we look forward to a very full day with my business partner, John Byrne, the editor-in-chief at Poets and Quants. He'll be sitting down with deans of some of the top business schools, and you'll be able to catch that either here in the Times Center or on the live stream. We have the co-author of Blue Ocean Strategy, a book that sold 3.6 million copies. This woman has been on the list of the Oscars in Management, the Thinkers 50, for the last 10 years, and is a strategy professor at INSEAD. So Renée Mauberne will be here with us at 1:45. And I'll also be sitting down with the admissions directors of many of the top US and European schools as part of a day that gives you the chance to meet with these top schools. But one of my favorite parts of CentreCourt is the ability to pull back that curtain in the admissions committee. You know, you guys will be talking to some of the most selective business schools on the planet. And so the idea of, you know, what are your chances applying to these schools? So you've been sending in your profiles, and we've put them together on slides to be able to talk through them. And our committee today here in New York, Judith Hodara, who was formerly the Director of Admissions at Wharton and now a co-director with me at Fortuna Admissions. Pascal Michels, who is the Director of MBA Admissions at IESA Business School from Barcelona. And I think this time zone works well for you, Pascal, right? 5 years. And Colleen Stanfer, who is a recruitment manager at HEC Paris. So I guess whoever has the clicker can move us on to the next slide, or two, in fact, even. Perhaps I should have walked out onto the stage with the clicker.
I have a clicker.
You have a clicker?
Is that what you need?
Okay.
Okay. I don't want to.
Committee team.
Okay.
So here's our team. And I've asked them to be as candid and pithy as we talk about the different aspects of each of these profiles, that some of this might resonate with your backgrounds. We're going to start with Trina from the Big Four. You know, whether you're from KPMG, Pricewaterhouse, Deloitte, or EY, that's a well-represented subset of any applicant pool to the top business schools. And Trina comes out of EY. She's already made senior associate. She's been out of school for 3 years, so a good fast track, and looking at a number of the top US business schools. Still imagines a career in consulting as she comes out of the MBA, yet to take either the GMAT or the GRE, and I wonder what the best option might be for them, and some great international experience in the UK and in China. So Judith, I'm going to start with you as you look at Trina's background. What did you like in what you saw about her?
So I really liked the fact that Trina had extensive experience as an undergrad in management with financial engineering, and she had also coupled that with an interest in Chinese studies. So that to me was a really nice dichotomy. It's a little unusual. I think in my time at Wharton and now with Fortuna, that's a really interesting combination. Someone who is heavily interested in finance and business, but also has sort of a more humanities side of an interest that they're pursuing along with that. I also am not as worried about the GMAT GRE yet. I think if she's coming out and she's been working at EY, she's obviously got the financial chops to be doing what she wants to be doing next. Probably would recommend she takes the GMAT, given the fact that she's had extensive quantitative exposure as an undergrad. Although, you know, it's entirely up to her, and as you all know, many schools are accepting both, and there's no real preference for one over the other. In addition, I very much like the international perspective, and I think that my colleagues here are going to like that as well. I'm assuming you share my fascination with that background.
Absolutely.
Right, Pascal, yes, international is certainly in the blood of a school like IESA. I also wanted to draw your attention. She's in that well-represented subset of the Big Four with EY, but certainly doing well in her career. To pick up on the mentoring that she's been doing with Stuyvesant. Mentoring would imply also then sort of reaching across the table to your future MBA classmates. Did you see this as a good way for Trina to sort of stand out in that competitive pool?
I was going to mention actually that the EY background puts her in a bucket that is quite full, right? The Big Four MBA applicants. And I was going to say, I obviously would want to talk to her, and it is that human dimension that you would want to tickle out of an interview. And the mentoring she's been doing points at her potentially being, a really strong contributor to the class experience, right? To the collaborative nature of the schools she's targeting and the school she's eventually going to join. So yes, that's definitely very positive, and we would like to look at it in an interview.
And this matters too, because as Judith pointed, her undergrad implies the level of academic vitality. You're not just thinking about Trina in the classroom, but how she's going to contribute to the business school community outside of the classroom, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't get, I put it this way, you get only so many brownie points for getting an A instead of a B+, right? At the end of the day, your classmates are going to appreciate your character, your openness, your willingness to help them.
Right. So you heard it live at CentreCourt. If you've got a B+ on the transcript, the schools can live with that one. Colleen, we sometimes think with recommenders, they're all going to be enthusiastic, supportive, but they can really play an important role. And it's not running to the corner office and the CEO that may not have worked with you very closely. Trina's thinking about one of the partners at EY and perhaps a closer substantive relationship with manager. What do you think about those choices?
I think those sound like very appropriate choices. Typically, a direct manager can be a really great reference because they know you so well. So we can assume that Trina's manager would be able to really speak in detail about how she is as a professional and speak to her potential as well. The partner, again, if it's someone who has worked closely with Trina, then it is definitely an appropriate choice. But again, it really matters more the relationship, right, that Trina might have with that particular partner.
Right. Now, we don't know with the profile sent in, EY is one of those companies that sponsors some of the folks going through. Judith, if she is company sponsored, that's very well received by the schools, right?
Yes, I would say that that indicates, not surprisingly, that EY has supported her, is interested in her development, may or may not expect her to come back. Many companies will say, we'll support you, and then we expect you for 2 or 3 years upon your graduation to come back and work for us. If you decide, and John just wrote an article about this, if you decide not to come back, then you would actually, owe us that tuition, which is an interesting opportunity for students that feel like this is an industry that they're interested in. Sure, I'll come back in a management position a few years after I graduate. Certainly, as you were talking about buckets, that helps to sort of put an asterisk next to the candidate's name, like, EY has already given their approval, and so this is someone that they feel, from everybody that they're seeing, is certainly a standout candidate. I wanted to talk for a minute, if I could, about the mentoring. And the profile doesn't say specifically what she's been doing, but I would be very interested to see what that actually means. Is it just something that she's put on her application? Is it a once-a-week thing? Has she had, individuals that she's worked with over a longer period of time? Does she have leadership within this organization? So that's the part that I'd be interested to have her talk a little bit more about, and maybe some of the leadership skills that she's developed as a result. But not just that she did it, but what was the depth of her connection, and then what was the impact of her engagement with that mentorship program as well.
Right. Now, of course, you all represent schools, and I don't want to put you on the spot. I'd go a step further with that GMAT or GRE. If she gets a competitive score, sort of 710, 720 plus, not only do I think that Trina will get interviews from at least 3 of those 4 schools, I think some of those schools will throw money her way, and very strong profile. So Trina, enjoy the afternoon talking to the schools here at CentreCourt. Jeff is the next one, from the military to McKinsey. That's one of the 2 M's that Harvard Business School often talks about. Jeff spent 7 years in the US Army that saw him on tours of duty to Kuwait, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Doesn't want to just make it into McKinsey, but he has the goal of making partner. And that's what 1.5% of every associates that ever get all the way to the top of that particular tree. Strong data points, the 3.8 GMAT, the 7 GPA, and a 760 GMAT. He's applying to M7 schools. Judith, these top schools, they see lots of great GPAs. They see lots of these super high GMATs. It's a well-balanced score. So what should Jeff really be looking to illustrate to help him stand out in those pools?
I think the biggest problem that military candidates face is that they're not always able to translate what they've been doing with what they want to do next. So his responsibility as a candidate, and it's not a question of not being able to share things because he's been in the military, but it's a question of being able to translate it so that it makes sense. I have this set of skills. I've worked in certain kinds of situations, which would be like working in a certain kind of engagement with McKinsey. So I think that that's a lot of, when we see military candidates, and certainly when I was at Wharton, we saw many applicants that were trying to figure out, how do I talk about what I did, and how do I talk about what that now means for my future? Because it's not an unusual launching pad into the next steps. He would certainly be someone that would be very attractive based on everything that we're seeing. And he has a really nice broad base of extracurricular activities, sort of missionary, church-based, and then again more in line with his military background as a Scout Master and an Eagle Scout advisor. I think that at the end of the day, schools are really going to be looking for that personal recommendation that's coming from people that he's worked with in the military that can talk about why he was such a standout. And I can tell you, Jeff, if you're listening, it's not a question of what rank you had in the military, because sometimes for a non-person, someone that's an admissions officer that's not completely familiar with it, may or may not have been able to differentiate, but certainly that kind of robust support that you're getting from your commanding officer or other individuals that you've worked with can be really helpful to help to parse the kind of work that you did and the impact that you're going to have on the community as well.
And Pascal, if I can bring you in, IESA with a 2-year program, he's looking at those top programs. Jeff will be spending 2 incredible years with a very talented, open-minded, ambitious group of classmates, and could end up doing many, many things. He's talking about that transition towards MBB, and actually, saying, I want to go all the way and make partner at McKinsey. When you ask applicants to sort of talk about their post-MBA career goals, what are you looking for? Do they need to be this specific and ambitious?
It's interesting. I'm going to say that I like everything about Jeff. Jeff is someone I want to interview. Jeff is someone I would think could make an incredible contribution to our school. But when I look at the employment, the post-MBA employment, the career goal, we kind of know that there's whether it's a large minority or a small majority of candidates who say they want consulting, it is actually because they have no idea what they want to do next. And there's a tiny part of me that thinks maybe this way of saying I want to go all the way to partner is to mitigate that risk, the risk of being perceived to be someone who doesn't really know what they want to do. And I think if that is the case, it is in Jeff's interest to just call it out and say I'm open to many options and do some research around what career paths veterans have been taking at the different schools he's targeting and educate himself about the different stories that are out there. Because
so you're saying because he wants to, it's interesting, because he wants to go to a partner that's like sort of, he has the drive and you don't question as much why he wants to do this.
What I was hoping to say, without being offensive, I hope, is that it's not necessary to say that you want to go to partner. I mean, this profile will go to McKinsey relatively independently of where they study. It's not a matter of where they study. This is a matter of McKinsey US offices loving ex-military personnel. If the leadership skills are there, the brains are there, if the personality is okay, this will work. So it almost makes me wonder, why partner? I mean, it seems unnecessary, if not to mitigate that perception of not being very clear on what he wants to do. So that would be the one thing I would probably even start the interview with. And
Jeff won't take offense because you said you'd already want to interview him. So Pascal likes Jeff. I think Judith is impressed with Jeff. So Colleen, I'd like you to give your response to Kelsey, who is in fact looking for business school this year. What are we today? March 30th. Okay, so we'll get our skates on. She's looking at European schools, so that is still within reach for some of these schools in the final rounds or stages that they offer. 4 years in marketing management and wants to pursue her career in marketing at the likes of Netflix or Amazon. A 3.1 GPA and has the GMAT to take. Perhaps she's taken it by now. And some strong international experience. Now, that international experience, perhaps drawing your attention towards that, Colleen, That really matters for those top European schools. You've got 50, 60
Yes.
nationalities in the class.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one thing that stands out right away with Kelsey's profile, is that extensive international exposure. When you're looking at the European schools, you're going to see a population that is extremely diverse. And so these schools are going to be looking to see what kind of exposure each candidate has had to collaborating amidst a diverse environment, or even just kind of the personality that it takes to actually pursue kind of those experiences abroad. So I would say that that is something that really stands out with her. The other thing I'd really like to highlight as well is her extracurricular activities. So it sounds like she is very well-rounded, very active, a very implicated individual. She was a member of Alpha Chi Omega, as a member of their, executive board. We can also see that she likes to volunteer. Again, when we're looking at these kind of activities, we're going to want to know exactly how implicated Kelsey is in these activities, and is she able to sort of articulate how those activities are, implicated in her kind of day-to-day or week-to-week, schedule, I guess. Going back towards Kelsey's idea about starting the program rather soon. So if the GMAT score has already been established, it really is, I would say, mostly about how comfortable she is with her GMAT, whether or not she wants to move forward at this stage with an application to one of these top schools for September. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like me to comment on with Kelsey.
I love puppies and just the idea of volunteering at the animal shelter. But even to that point, Pascal, as you're going through a resume, you're not just relying on a job title or that sort of short description, whether it's professionally or on extracurriculars. Like finding that substance, should that be in the resume, or trying to find that balance and also sharing some of those passions and interests in the essays that you're submitting to schools?
The extracurricular interests. Look, I mean, there's a general information / interests section at the bottom of the resume. I would put it there just because it's where the eye rests after diagonally going through a resume in 15 seconds, right? So I think it's a good idea. It could trigger an interesting conversation. Now, building an essay around it, I'm not sure this is what I would recommend here. I look at the post-MBA goals, and director of marketing at Netflix makes me think Netflix probably hires for marketing mainly in the US. And how is that compatible with studying in Europe? Are expectations aligned with what the market yields? And then Amazon, do they even hire for marketing? So Amazon is the biggest on-campus recruiter in the world. They gobble up MBAs in really significant numbers. I would want to see whether Kelsey has understood how these two companies hire, and then probably it would be a very career-based conversation and not so much about puppies. But that's maybe because I'm a cat person.
The puppies can be an icebreaker in the interview. Right, so really sort of tying those career goals, and not just the firms, but positions within those firms, and the coherence that brings
What would
in.
you guys need to see from the GMAT? Because the 3-1 from Utah State is a little disconcerting. I don't know what you guys would be expecting on the GMAT for that.
I don't know that you could put a number on it. When I'm looking at the GPA, I'm also thinking maybe this person, Kelsey, was so involved while she was at school that she didn't dedicate as much time to, to her studies as maybe some other higher GPAs that we would see. But I think if you're going to target, Kelsey, one of these schools, I think look at their average GMAT scores and then really try to be within, a close range to those averages in order to sort of counterbalance that, decent GPA, but not like superstar GPA. I don't know.
Right.
And
go ahead, Pascal.
No, what I would say on the GMAT is the school's averages are a good way to know whether you are in the safe space. But I would find it tragic if Kelsey let a low GMAT or GRE deter her from applying, because the worst that could happen is that the school says, well, listen, could you please retake the GMAT? And then because this is a late application, maybe there's no time, and then maybe that means postponing MBA plans by 1 year, but I doubt that would be the outcome. I think this would end up with an interview and a frank conversation around academic risk. Can you handle the academics of an MBA program? And that would be potentially an additional area of focus.
And it's great to have a director of admissions from a top school on this stage saying Don't be deterred by a standardized test. Yeah, we've got it on record now. Sachin, well, he's got a solid GMAT score. He's got a 710 in his pocket. The fifth Beatle, why have we described? Well, Entertain 89 is, I think, a PE firm working in the music and entertainment industry. And he wants to continue in that industry track and looking at a number of the schools that are with us here today on the East and West Coasts, obviously the heart of music and entertainment in the US. And music in his blood. He was running the Battle of the Bands at college. Someone in the music industry, Judith, is that going to, we had EY earlier, music industry, is that going to stand out because of the sector they're working in?
I think so. I think that's a little unusual, especially I'm looking at some of the other schools that he's looking at. Probably not so unusual for UCLA and NYU Stern, a little more unusual for Wharton, but definitely someone, if he plays it correctly and doesn't really rely on the Battle of the Band stuff from college, but is talking about music as industry with Entertain 89, which admittedly I've never heard of, so tells you what I know about music, which is very little. I do think that he would be someone to pay attention to, and I'd be interested to see what the story is. You know, what was the impetus? How did he get interested in music? Did he play the tuba when he was 7 or something like that? Or, you know, who turned him on to all of this? But he would definitely be someone, if he came across my desk, I would probably take a pause and think, oh, this is pretty interesting.
Right, right. The average age of the Wharton MBA class is about 27. At some of the top European schools, it's closer to 29, even 30. He came out of school 9 years ago. The older applicant, do they just need to be more clear about next career steps? Colleen, when you see someone that's reached 30, early 30s, there are plenty of them. What are you looking for?
Indeed. That is true that at the European schools, the average age tends to go a little bit higher. I think when you're at that stage of your career, it is important to have a realistic expectation for what you're going to pursue after the MBA program concludes. In this case, I think it is interesting with the age, given the industry that Sachin is working in, you know, and that he wants to continue in he or she wants to continue in the music industry. I think this is a good sign because it is coherent with the pre-MBA experience. And so that's something really important. Is the plan coherent? Could be especially important for those applicants that are 30, 31, 32 years old. There was one thing that I did want to also mention that was just curious is the CFA level 1 and 2. So that is something as well that's going to indicate to, you know, an admissions committee, wow, this is someone who is clearly a very hard worker, very rigorous, is maybe interested across subjects within business. So that's something that kind of drew my eye.
And just a quick word, Pascal, maybe in terms of bringing clients for recommendations, that can, if you've got that core letter that, you know, talks about your professional background, a client can then presumably add some very interesting complementary perspectives.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not big on recommendations because I trust everyone's ability to get a good recommendation if they have the choice of the recommender. Now, what this specific dimension would bring to an interview is perhaps a good conversation starter, right? Because this Entertain 89 is a PE firm. He's a portfolio manager on track to get a CFA. You know, how does a client look at someone who is on his way to business school, right? Well, it's a very interesting perspective. I've actually never seen something like that, so it might be the beginning of the interview.
Right, place for that conversation to start in the interview. We've got 2 more to conclude the committee session today. Luis from Uruguay, who, compared to some of the others that we've seen in this session, has had quite a breadth and eclectic mix of experience. Consultancy, repeatedly and around sort of investment analyst, but he spent a year working in a vineyard. Doesn't that sound like fun? And before that, a bond trader. So there's no knowing where your career might take you. Perhaps that's something, Colleen, I'll have you start with Luis. Building that sort of narrative of all of that experience that you're bringing to business school. So what advice would you give to Luis as he sort of pulls that story together?
Yeah, I think that is the key word, is the story. When you're looking at schools, they're really going to want to understand who you are as a person, right? And what is your trajectory thus far in your career, and where is it that you want to go? So having coherence, I think, in your story is super important. So in Luis's case, we see, this kind of, very interesting kind of employment history that we're just going to do a check and see, okay, so what are your objectives? The post-MBA career goals of a startup for brand marketing, I mean, this could be quite interesting. I mean, what kind of brand, what kind of company are you going to seek to really be starting, I guess, or working with? Other things that I see with Luis, again, those extracurriculars I think are very, very interesting because, again, it's all about the story. It's all about who you are as a person. So the career trajectory, very important. The academic side, very important as well, but it's not just about that. So I think it's really about highlighting everything in the story to make it coherent with the target schools and with the post-MBA goals.
Right, so pulling that story together, maybe GMAT, would you be comfortable with that GMAT, Pascal, with a GPA below 3.0? I mean, some US schools will say, we don't look at a GPA below 3.
I mean, the GMAT needs to be good enough to give me the confidence that Luis can handle the program stuff at any of these schools. It needs to be high enough not to completely jeopardize my GMAT average. But that is not what I would. That is not what worries me. And if indeed Luis ends up interviewing with us, I would really like to do the interview personally, and I would really drill down on his employment history, because I want to understand how the desire to do an MBA program that is longer than any of the stints he has had, except the bond trading previously, how is that going to work? I mean, for Luis, doing a 2-year MBA is a long-term commitment, and if the story here is that Luis is brilliant, he is impatient, he's young, he's full of energy, he wants to go places, and that's why he's been jumping around, so be it. I've read the one or other article about millennials. I know that these things happen these days, but that is definitely where I would focus my attention. And then, yes, hey Luis, so you're a great guy. Why is your GMAT so low?
Right. We couldn't be in New York without having an investment banker in the list. We're going to finish with David before the 1 o'clock panel begins. And David has a 760. One of the M7 schools, the word from the dean's office 18 months ago, it was unacceptable where their GMAT average was for US News and other rankings. And in the 12 months that followed, their GMAT score rose by 16 points. I'll let all of you to do the data checking on finding which school it was. David's looking at the M7, and he has his background with IB at Morgan. He's now in PE and wants to take that PE experience to China. Judith, if you talk about private equity,
I know David. I worked with him. He's a really nice guy. And he's got a terrific background. I mean, when you look at the trajectory that he's taken, the fact that he studied as an undergrad, that he was really involved with math and also interested in, because of his background, also interested in Mandarin and Chinese culture. And so this was a great profile. The Chinese piece, where he wanted to go do PE, was particularly interesting to us because I felt like he was helping himself to stand out of the pack, which is a big pack for those of you that are in any of these entities in New York City. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more on the extracurricular side from him, besides being a member of the investment committee.
But when you work in IB and private equity, you're probably working 80 to 90,
not a lot of
100 hours a week. But you're still then looking for some sort of community engagement.
Or an interest in, something else that you like to do in your free time, or recognizing that you don't have a lot of free time and what you would want to do if you had that opportunity. And this is not unusual to be concerned about asking your current boss. You're worried about year-end bonuses, you're worried about opportunity for advancement. And I certainly just tell students to be upfront about that and to say, I can't ask the person I report to directly, and this is why. But to me, this was a really nice trajectory, and clearly, academically and professionally, had it together. He was going to need to be very personal, though. With a profile like this, you really need to dig down and not just rest on what you've done and what you've accomplished, but really what is driving you, and to get some good storytelling in there, because that's going to help him to separate himself from the rest of the pack in that regard.
And does this story end well for David?
don't know if I can talk about it.
Okay, all right. Well, then we'll look forward to when David updates his LinkedIn profile. We hope that was sort of 30 minutes. This is what the admissions committee is, right? These are the discussions, the sort of depth of analysis of how long have they spent. Ours is a program of this length. So thank you, all three of you, for sharing these insights. Do send in your own profiles. We run other sessions with admissions and former admissions from the top 15 schools. We're delighted that we had such a quality panel for this one. Thank you very much, all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.